The crystal glasses shattered as Mark yanked the tablecloth, sending our wedding feast crashing to the floor. The sound of breaking china mixed with gasps from the few remaining guests who hadn't yet left our intimate reception. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of my white dress, watching my new husband's face contort with rage. "You'll sign it over now," he roared, his perfectly styled hair falling across his forehead as he leaned across the chaos he'd created. "Every penny of your inheritance needs to be in my name by tonight." I sat frozen, my mind racing back through the whirlwind 6 months that had led to this moment. How had I missed the signs? The rushed courtship, his intense interest in my family's financial matters, the way he'd insisted on a quick private ceremony rather than the celebration I'd dreamed of. It all made terrible sense now. "Mark, please," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is our wedding day. Let's talk about this tomorrow when we're both calmer." I could feel my mother's pearl necklace, her last gift to me before cancer took her, growing heavy against my throat. He slammed his fist on the table, making me jump. "No more delays, Catherine. I've waited long enough. I'm getting the lawyer right now. Don't you dare move." He stormed out, the double doors of the small reception hall banging against the walls. The remaining guests, mostly his business associates, awkwardly gathered their things and hurried out, avoiding my eyes. Only Sandra, my childhood best friend who'd served as my maid of honor, remained. She rushed to my side, her green dress swishing against the scattered rose petals on the floor. "Kat, we need to get you out of here," she urged, her voice low and urgent. I knew something was off about him, but I didn't want to ruin your happiness. "I'm so sorry I didn't speak up sooner." My mind raced to the manila envelope hidden in my overnight bag, the one containing all the documentation of my inheritance, including the deed to my family's historic bed and breakfast, the business my parents had built from the ground up, the legacy they'd entrusted to me. Mark had been pushing me to modernize our finances, to consolidate everything under his management. Now I understood why. With trembling fingers, I reached under the table and grabbed my small clutch. "Sandra, I need you to create a diversion when they return. Can you do that for me?" She squeezed my hand. "Anything. What are you planning?" I stood up, my wedding dress whispering against the floor. Something I should have done hours ago. But first, there's someone I need to call. As I hurried to the bridal suite where my overnight bag waited, I could hear Mark's voice echoing down the hallway, accompanied by another man's measured tones. My heart pounded as I grabbed my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Time was running out, but I had one card left to play, one that would wipe the smug certainty right off Mark's face. As I gathered my things, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. Mom had always told me I had her strength, her spirit. Tonight, I would prove her right. I heard footsteps approaching, and my pulse quickened. But for the first time since the tablecloth crashed to the floor, I felt something beyond fear. Determination. Mark thought he had orchestrated the perfect trap, but he was about to learn that he had underestimated the wrong woman. As I gathered my essential documents and a change of clothes, memories of the past 6 months flashed through my mind like a twisted slideshow. The charming smile Mark had worn when we first met at my family's bed and breakfast now seemed like a carefully crafted mask. I'd been struggling to keep the business afloat after losing both my parents within a year of each other. Mom's cancer had been swift and brutal, and Dad, well, his heart simply couldn't bear the loss. The historic Victorian mansion they'd lovingly restored had been my childhood home, and now it was my responsibility, along with the mounting maintenance costs and declining bookings. Mark had appeared like a guardian angel, checking in as a guest during the off-season. He claimed to be a business consultant taking a break from the city, but now I wondered if he'd researched me long before booking that room. He'd seemed so genuinely interested in the property's history, in my stories about growing up there. When he offered business advice, it felt natural, helpful, not the calculated grooming it really was. "The hospitality industry is changing," he'd said over coffee one morning, his blue eyes intense with concern. "You need to adapt, or you'll lose everything your parents worked for." I zipped up my bag, fighting back tears as I remembered how he'd slowly woven himself into every aspect of my life. The casual suggestions about modernizing the business turned into lengthy discussions about joint ventures. The romantic dinners were peppered with talks about financial security. Even his proposal, just 3 months after we met, had come with a speech about combining our strengths to build a legacy. Sandra appeared in the doorway of the bridal suite, her face tense. "He's coming back with someone who looks like a lawyer. What's the plan, Kat?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the text I'd sent earlier. Her eyes widened as she read it. "You're sure about this?" she whispered. I nodded, slipping off my heels and putting on the flat shoes I'd hidden under my dress. More sure than I was about saying "I do" 2 hours ago? The sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway made us both freeze. Mark's voice carried through the door, that smooth, persuasive tone I'd once found so comforting now sending chills down my spine. "You can't hide in there forever, Catherine," he called out. "Be reasonable. This is for the best. For both of us. For the business." I thought about the document he wanted me to sign, already prepared by his lawyer. He'd mentioned it this morning as just a formality, a way to protect our future together. The same way he'd convinced me to postpone hiring a new marketing manager because he knew someone perfect for the job. The same way he'd suggested I hold off on replacing the aging heating system because he had a better investment opportunity. Sandra squeezed my hand. "Ready?" I touched my mother's pearls one last time, drawing strength from them. "Almost. There's something else I need to grab first." Moving quickly to the antique desk where I'd left my wedding folder, I pulled out a USB drive hidden in its lining. 2 weeks ago, I'd discovered some concerning emails on Mark's laptop when he'd asked me to check his flight confirmation. He'd forgotten to close his other tabs, and what I saw had planted the first real seed of doubt. I'd copied everything, telling myself I was being paranoid. Now I was grateful for that moment of suspicion. "Catherine!" Mark's voice was harder now, all pretense of charm gone. "Open this door right now." I looked at Sandra and nodded. It was time to set our plan in motion. She pulled out her phone, ready to play her part. "Do it," I whispered. As Sandra started her carefully orchestrated distraction, I thought about the person waiting in Mark's study back at his house, the one person whose arrival would shatter his perfectly planned scheme. Sometimes the best defense isn't just about running away. It's about making sure you have witnesses to the truth. The door handle jiggled violently. In a few moments, everything would change. But this time, I was the one in control of the story. The door burst open just as Sandra's plan sprang into action. The fire alarm's piercing wail filled the building, and chaos erupted in the hallway. Mark's face twisted with rage as he saw my packed bag. "What do you think you're doing?" he snarled, taking a step toward me. The lawyer behind him, a nervous-looking man with wire-rimmed glasses, clutched his briefcase tighter. I straightened my spine, channeling every ounce of my mother's strength. "Exactly what you taught me to do, Mark. Protecting my assets." His laugh was cold, calculated. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" "Everything's already in motion. The contracts for the renovation are signed. The new staff has been hired. Face it, Catherine. You need me." That's when I played my first card. "Actually," I said, pulling out my phone, "those contracts aren't valid. You see, I never gave you power of attorney." I turned to the lawyer. "Mr. Peters, isn't it? I believe you'll find that your firm has been processing paperwork based on forged signatures." The lawyer's face went pale. "Mr. Henderson, you assured me—" "She's lying," Mark snapped, but I could see the first flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Show her the papers, now!" As Mr. Peters fumbled with his briefcase, I continued. "I've already spoken with the contractors. Funny thing about small towns, people talk, especially when someone claims to be acting on behalf of a beloved local business without proper authorization." Sandra stepped forward, her phone recording everything. "I have copies of all the original documents, Mark, the ones without Catherine's signatures. The ones where you tried to redirect the B&B's accounts to your personal holdings." Mark's composure cracked further. "You stupid woman," he hissed at me. "You have no idea what you're doing. That place is falling apart. The loans, the taxes, you'll lose everything without my help." I felt a calm settle over me as I reached into my bag. "That's where you're wrong. Again. Did you really think I wouldn't notice the discrepancies in the books? The way money was being siphoned out of the business accounts?" His face went white. What are you talking about? The same thing your previous wife is probably talking about right now with the FBI agent in your study. The bomb had dropped. Mark staggered back as if I'd physically struck him. What did you say? Rachel sends her regards, I said softly. She was very interested in the pattern she noticed when she saw my engagement announcement. The same pattern that cost her her family's restaurant 3 years ago. A whirlwind romance, a rushed wedding, suspicious financial transfers. The lawyer was already backing away, clutching his briefcase like a shield. Mr. Henderson, I think we should continue this discussion after consulting with— Shut up, Mark roared, his carefully constructed facade completely shattered. He lunged toward me, but Sandra was faster, stepping between us as the sound of sirens grew louder outside. I wouldn't, she warned, her phone still recording. The police are already on their way. Something about suspected fraud and potential domestic violence? I watched as the realization dawned in Mark's eyes. He'd been outplayed at his own game, but I wasn't finished yet. Reaching up, I unclasped my mother's pearls. You know what the funny thing is? I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. If you'd bothered to really learn about my family's business instead of just seeing dollar signs, you would have known that the B&B isn't even the most valuable asset I inherited. The confusion on his face would have been comical if it weren't so tragic. What are you talking about? My mother's family owned half the historic district, Mark. The B&B was just their passion project. The real estate holdings are all in a trust that you couldn't have touched even if I had signed your papers. I smiled sadly. But you were too busy plotting to notice that the woman you married was more than just a struggling innkeeper. The sound of footsteps thundering up the stairs signaled the arrival of the police. As they burst into the hallway, I saw another familiar face among them, Detective Sarah Martinez, my mother's best friend and my godmother. Perfect timing, I said, watching as Mark's world crumbled around him. I believe everyone's here now for the real reception. The next few hours passed in a blur of police statements and quiet conversations in separate rooms. I sat in what had been meant to be our wedding suite, my white dress now a symbol of bullets dodged rather than promises made. Detective Martinez sat across from me, her familiar presence bringing both comfort and painful memories of my mother. You did good, kid, she said, closing her notebook. Real good. But I need to know, when did you first suspect something wasn't right? I smoothed my skirt, buying time to organize my thoughts. It started with little things. Inconsistencies in his stories about his past, the way he'd dodge questions about his family. But the real turning point came 3 weeks ago. I thought back to that rainy Tuesday afternoon. I'd been going through old photos for a heritage display at the B&B when an email notification popped up on my laptop. It was from an unfamiliar address with just a single line. Before you marry Mark Henderson, we should talk. Rachel's email. Sarah nodded. She reached out to us around the same time. Yes, but I didn't know about that then. I almost deleted it as spam, but something made me respond. When Rachel told me her story, I paused, fighting back tears. It was like reading my own story, just 3 years earlier. The same charming businessman, the same rushed romance, the same subtle pushing to consolidate assets. Sandra appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 cups of tea. She'd refused to leave my side throughout the ordeal. Tell her about the ledger, Kat. I accepted the tea gratefully. After Rachel's warning, I started digging. Mark had insisted on modernizing our accounting system, but I kept finding small discrepancies. Money being moved between accounts in ways that didn't make sense. When I pretended to be completely clueless about business matters, he became less careful about hiding his tracks. Classic predator behavior, Sarah commented. They get cocky when they think they've found an easy mark. I smiled grimly. He forgot that I grew up watching my parents run this business. Mom made sure I understood every aspect of it before. I swallowed hard. Before she got sick. The night I found the hidden accounts he'd set up, I called Rachel. We spent hours comparing notes, finding patterns. And that's when you contacted us, Sarah finished. Not quite yet. I reached for my bag and pulled out a leather-bound notebook. First, I needed proof. Real proof. So I played along. Every time he pushed me to sign something, I made copies. Every time he made a call about the business, I took notes. I even planted some false information about additional property holdings to see what he'd do. Sandra sat beside me, her shoulder touching mine in silent support. The trap with the contractor was brilliant. I nodded. I knew he'd try to start taking control before the wedding, so I created a fake renovation proposal with a contractor friend of my dad's. Mark took the bait immediately, forging my signature to approve the work. That's when I had everything I needed. "Why wait until the wedding?" Sarah asked, though I could tell from her expression she already knew. "Because I needed everyone to see who he really was. No more charming facade, no more plausible deniability." I touched my mother's pearls, now safely tucked in my bag. And because Rachel deserved to see him exposed. 3 years ago, nobody believed her. She lost everything because he was too smooth, too practiced at maintaining his image. "About Rachel." Sarah leaned forward. "There's something you should know. After you left the reception hall, we found evidence in Mark's study linking him to at least 2 other similar schemes in different states. The news hit me like a physical blow." "Other women?" "Yes, and they're all willing to testify. Between their statements, your evidence, and what Rachel documented, he's not going to charm his way out of this one." A knock at the door made us all turn. Another officer stood there, looking apologetic. "Detective Martinez? We need you downstairs. And Ms. Collins, there's someone here from the DA's office who'd like to speak with you." I stood, smoothing my dress one final time. "Before we go down, there's one more thing you should see." I pulled out the USB drive. 2 days ago, I found emails between Mark and someone named Anthony Carlton. They were discussing other potential investment opportunities, other women they'd targeted. Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Anthony Carlton? Are you sure?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because Anthony Carlton is the name of a person of interest in several similar fraud cases across state lines. If we can prove a connection..." She trailed off, already reaching for her phone. As she made her call, I looked around the room that should have been the start of my married life. Instead, it had become the place where I'd helped expose a criminal network. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Ready?" Sandra asked softly. I squared my shoulders. "Almost. There's one last thing I need to do." I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. Time to reverse every single transaction he managed to make in the past 6 months. My parents built this business on trust and honesty. It's time to restore that legacy. The following days were a whirlwind of legal meetings and police interviews. I found myself sitting in the B&B's library, my favorite room since childhood, surrounded by documentation of Mark's elaborate fraud scheme. Rachel sat across from me, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, looking both exhausted and relieved. "I still can't believe you pulled it off," she said, shaking her head. "When I sent that email, I was just hoping to warn you before it was too late. I never imagined that we'd end up taking down an entire network," I finished, managing a small smile. "Neither did I. But then again, I never imagined I'd be spending my honeymoon period in meetings with the FBI either." The morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the antique desk where my parents had once planned their future together. Now I was using it to plan my own, just not in the way I'd expected. "Ms. Collins?" Agent Wilson appeared in the doorway, his tie slightly loosened after hours of interviews. "We've finished analyzing the USB drive you provided. You're going to want to hear this." Rachel and I exchanged glances before following him to the B&B's small conference room, which had been temporarily converted into an investigation hub. Sarah Martinez was already there, surrounded by stacks of papers and looking grimmer than I'd ever seen her. "Catherine," she began, "what you uncovered goes far beyond Mark and Anthony Carlton. This is a sophisticated operation targeting women who've inherited family businesses across multiple states. They specifically look for properties with historical value or significant real estate holdings." My stomach churned. "How many?" "We've identified 12 potential victims so far," Agent Wilson replied, spreading photographs across the table. 3 succeeded in fighting back, including Rachel. 4 lost everything. The others are in various stages of being targeted. I picked up one of the photos. A beautiful Victorian-era theater in Boston. "Have you warned them?" "We're proceeding carefully," Sarah explained. "These men have powerful connections and deep pockets. We need to build an airtight case. A knock at the door made us all turn. Sandra entered, carrying a stack of files. "You need to see this," she said, her voice tense. "I've been going through the B&B's old guest records, cross-referencing them with the dates in Mark's emails. He didn't just show up here by chance. They had been watching the business for months, ever since. Since my mother's obituary was published," I finished, feeling cold despite the warm spring day. The thought of them targeting me during my period of grief made me feel physically ill. "There's more," Sandra continued. "Remember that corporate retreat group that canceled last minute 6 months ago? The one that would have helped cover the property tax bill? I found emails suggesting Mark's associates engineered that cancellation to put additional financial pressure on you." I gripped the edge of the table, anger replacing nausea. "They deliberately tried to make me desperate. It's their pattern," Rachel added quietly. "They create problems, then swoop in with solutions. By the time you realize what's happening, they've already started legally separating you from your assets." Agent Wilson cleared his throat. "Ms. Collins, we'd like to use your case to set up a sting operation. Several of their other targets are in the early stages of being courted by members of this network. If we can catch them in the act—" "You want me to go public?" I said. It wasn't a question. Sarah reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "Only if you're willing. But your story, especially the evidence you gathered, could help protect others." I looked around the room at the faces of these people who had helped me escape a nightmare. Then my eyes drifted to the photo on the wall. My parents on the day they opened the B&B, their faces glowing with pride and hope. "I'll do it," I said firmly. "But on one condition. We don't just expose the fraud. We create a support network for women like us." I gestured between Rachel and myself. "A way to share information, resources, and warnings." Rachel's eyes lit up. "Like an early warning system?" "Exactly. These men prey on women when they're vulnerable, when they're dealing with loss or struggling to maintain family businesses. They isolate us, make us feel like we're alone. So let's change that." Sandra was already pulling out her laptop. "I can set up a secure website, something that looks like a business networking group on the surface, but actually, a fortress," I finished. "A way for women to protect what they've built." Agent Wilson nodded approvingly. "We can provide guidance on making it secure, ensuring any warnings can be verified to prevent false allegations." As the discussion continued, I felt something I hadn't experienced since finding Rachel's email: hope. Not just for myself, but for all the women who might be spared what we'd gone through. "There's one more thing," Sarah said, pulling out a final document. "We found this in Mark's home office. It's a list of potential targets for the next 6 months." I took the paper with trembling hands, scanning the names and locations. Each one represented a woman who, like me, had no idea what was coming. "Well," I said, straightening my shoulders, "I guess we have work to do." A month after what should have been my wedding day, I stood in front of the B&B's ornate mirror, adjusting my blazer. Today wasn't about the past. It was about the future. The historic dining room downstairs was set up for our first Business Women's Network meeting, a cover for what we'd come to call the Guardian Circle. "Everything's ready," Sandra announced, tablet in hand. "We have 7 confirmed attendees, all vetted by Sarah's team. 3 are current targets of the network. 2 are previous victims who've rebuilt their lives, and 2 are legitimate business owners who can provide professional support." I touched my mother's pearls, now a symbol of strength rather than loss. "And the security?" "FBI agents posing as staff. Plus our new security system is fully operational. Nobody gets in or out without being logged." The precautions might have seemed excessive, but we'd learned the hard way that Mark's organization didn't take defeats lightly. Just last week, someone had tried to hack our newly established support website. Instead of finding vulnerable women's information, they'd walked right into an FBI cyber trap. "Ms. Collins?" One of the undercover agents appeared at the door. "Your first guest has arrived. And there's something else you should know." I followed him to the security room we'd set up in what used to be the B&B study. Sarah was already there, reviewing footage from our external cameras. "Look who just parked across the street," she said, pointing to a sleek black car. My heart skipped a beat. "Anthony Carlton." "He's getting bold," Sarah muttered. "Or desperate." Either way, this might be the break we need. Over the past month, we'd uncovered more about Carlton's role in the organization. He wasn't just Mark's partner. He was the architect of their entire operation. While Mark and others like him played the charming suitors, Carlton managed the financial side, creating elaborate schemes to transfer assets and hide their tracks. "Should we cancel the meeting?" Sandra asked. I watched the security feed as more cars arrived, carrying women who'd traveled from different states, each carrying their own story of near misses or hard-learned lessons. "No, we're done hiding." In fact, a plan began forming in my mind. "Catherine," Sarah warned, recognizing my expression. "Whatever you're thinking, we have 7 successful businesswomen about to meet in one room," I said. "Women they've either targeted or failed to con. What better way to smoke out their whole operation than to let them think we're vulnerable?" Rachel, who'd been quietly observing, stepped forward. "She's right. They're watching us anyway. Why not control what they see?" The next hour was a flurry of activity as we modified our plans. The legitimate networking meeting would proceed as planned, but with an added layer of strategic information sharing. Let Carlton and his associates think they were gathering intelligence on potential targets. In reality, every conversation, every business card exchanged, every detail shared would be carefully crafted to lead them exactly where we wanted. As I welcomed our guests, I couldn't help but notice how different each woman was, yet how similar their stories. Diana, whose family's artisanal food business had almost fallen into Mark's hands 3 years ago. Elena, currently being courted by one of Carlton's associates, playing along while gathering evidence. Jessica, whose historic theater had been saved at the last minute when she connected with Rachel. "Before we begin," I addressed the group, "I want to share something my mother used to say. Success isn't just about building something valuable. It's about protecting what matters." I glanced at the window, knowing Carlton or his associates were likely watching. Today, we're going to talk about protection, about recognition, about turning vulnerability into strength. As the meeting progressed, I watched these remarkable women share their experiences, their warnings, their triumph stories. Each piece of information they shared was a carefully placed breadcrumb, leading our observers down a path of their own making. "There's movement," Sarah whispered in my earpiece. "Carlton's making calls. Lots of them." I smiled, continuing my presentation about modernizing historic businesses, a topic that had particular meaning for everyone in the room. "The key," I said clearly, knowing our words were likely being recorded, "is knowing who to trust with your legacy." Sandra's tablet lit up with a message. Our cyber team had detected multiple attempts to access the business profiles we'd strategically placed online. They were taking the bait. But as I watched these women supporting each other, sharing genuine advice mixed with our carefully planned deceptions, I realized we'd created something far more valuable than a sting operation. We'd built a real network of support, protection, and empowerment. The sound of more cars arriving drew my attention. Through the historic windows, I could see several unmarked vehicles quietly surrounding Carlton's position. Sarah slipped out of the room, coordinating with her team. "Ladies," I said, maintaining my composed demeanor, "let's take a break for coffee, and perhaps a bit of justice." The events that unfolded over the next hour seemed almost choreographed in their precision. As our group took their coffee break, moving to the B&B's wraparound porch for fresh air, I watched Anthony Carlton's carefully constructed world begin to crumble. He must have realized something was wrong when the first FBI vehicle pulled up beside his car. I could see him through the window, his expensive suit and polished appearance a stark contrast to the panic in his movements as he reached for his phone. But it was already too late. "It's done," Sarah's voice came through my earpiece. "His accounts are frozen. All of them." I thought of the countless women who had lost everything to this man's schemes, and I felt a fierce satisfaction watching him being led away in handcuffs. But the real victory wasn't in his arrest. It was in what we'd built to stop others like him. "Catherine," Elena called softly, drawing my attention back to our group. "Someone else is here." A taxi had pulled up to the B&B, and from it emerged a woman I recognized from the case files, Patricia Morrison, Carlton's wife. The FBI agents moved to intercept her, but I held up my hand. "Let her through," I said. I'd learned enough about their operation to know that not everyone who seemed complicit was a willing participant. Patricia walked up the porch steps, her designer handbag clutched tight against her chest. Her eyes were red-rimmed but determined. "I have something you need to see," she said, pulling out a thick folder. "Everything. Every scheme, every target, every offshore account. I've been collecting it for years, waiting for someone to finally stop him." Rachel stepped forward, her face soft with understanding. "You were trapped too, weren't you?" Patricia nodded, tears spilling over. "He married me for my family's connections, used them to make himself look legitimate. When I figured it out, he made sure I knew exactly what would happen if I ever spoke up." I guided her to a seat, signaling Sandra to bring another cup of coffee. "You're safe now. And what you've brought us, this could help protect countless others." "There's more," Patricia continued, her voice stronger. "I know who's running the whole operation. Carlton and Mark. They're just the public faces. The real boss is someone none of you would suspect." Before she could finish, a commotion erupted at the front gate. A familiar figure was arguing with the security team. George Whitman, the city's most prominent real estate developer, and, I suddenly realized with crystal clarity, the man who'd first introduced my parents to their accountant 15 years ago. "He's trying to delete files remotely," one of the cyber team members reported through our earpieces. "But we've got everything backed up." I watched as understanding dawned on Sarah's face. "Whitman. He's been orchestrating this for decades, hasn't he? Using his position to identify potential targets, gathering intelligence on valuable properties, and setting up the next generation to take over," I finished, thinking of all the times he'd visited the B&B during my parents' illness, always so concerned, so helpful with financial advice. Patricia's hand shook as she pulled out one final document. "This proves it. The whole organization," he called it Property Acquisition Through Strategic Marriages, or PASM. They even had training manuals. The absurdity of it, that they'd turned destroying women's lives into a business model with manuals and procedures, made my blood boil. But as I looked around at our group, I saw not victims, but warriors. Each woman here had faced their worst fears and emerged stronger. "Ladies," I said, addressing our gathering, "I think it's time to show them what happens when you underestimate women in business." What happened next was a masterclass in coordinated action. While the FBI handled the arrests, our network sprang into motion. Diana, with her media connections, began crafting the story. Elena, a lawyer by training, started organizing the evidence for prosecution. Jessica, who ran a tech company besides her theater, worked with our cyber team to track down every digital footprint of their operation. As the sun set over the B&B, casting long shadows across the porch where so much had changed in just one day, I found myself sitting in my mother's favorite rocking chair. Sarah joined me, looking both exhausted and satisfied. "Your parents would be proud," she said quietly, "not just of taking them down, but of what you're building in its place." I touched the B&B's weathered railing, thinking of all the history these walls had seen. "We're not just saving businesses," I replied. "We're saving legacies, dreams, futures." Rachel appeared with fresh coffee and a determined expression. "The website's blown up. We've already had 3 women reach out with similar stories. Different players, same playbook." "Then we have more work to do," I said, standing up. The night was far from over, but for the first time since this all began, I felt truly free. Not just from Mark and his schemes, but from the fear that had driven so many of us to silence. We had created something they never expected, a fortress of women supporting women, turning their weapons of isolation and shame against them. The B&B, once their target, had become the headquarters of their downfall. And this was just the beginning. The weeks following the arrests brought a flood of revelations that none of us were fully prepared for. As I sat in my office at the B&B, now transformed into the headquarters of what we called the Business Heritage Protection Network, the scale of what we'd uncovered continued to grow. "Another one," Sandra said, placing a fresh file on my desk. "Amanda Brown, family-owned restaurant chain in Seattle. They targeted her right after her grandmother passed away." I opened the file, my heart heavy as I read the familiar pattern. "Let me guess. Business consultants showed up offering to help modernize their operations? Close. Restaurant critic this time. Wrote a scathing review, tanked their ratings, then swooped in as a PR consultant. Sandra's face darkened. They're getting creative. The door opened, and Rachel entered with Elena, both carrying laptops. You need to see this, Elena said, pulling up a spreadsheet. We've been analyzing the data from Patricia's files. This goes back 30 years, Catherine. Whitman didn't just create this scheme. He inherited it from his own father. I leaned back in my chair, processing this information. A generational operation. And that's not all, Rachel added. Remember how Mark targeted me through my family's restaurant? We found a pattern. They specifically went after businesses with strong family histories, especially women-owned ones. Because those businesses have something money can't buy, I realized. Legacy, community trust, generations of goodwill. Exactly. They weren't just stealing properties. They were stealing histories. A knock at the door interrupted us. Sarah entered looking both tired and triumphant. Whitman's talking, she announced, trying to cut a deal. But here's the interesting part. He's giving up names of people in other states running similar operations. The implications hit me hard. It's not just one network. No. Think of it like a franchise of fraud. Whitman's group was just one cell. There are others, all operating on the same basic playbook. I stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the B&B's gardens. My mother had planted those roses, teaching me about patience and nurturing things that matter. Now those lessons seemed more relevant than ever. We need to expand, I said finally. Not just helping women recover their businesses, but preventing these attacks in the first place. Elena nodded, already typing. I've been working on a legal framework, a way to create protected trust structures that make it harder for these predators to gain control. And I've developed a warning system, Sandra added, using AI to monitor business registrations and ownership transfers for suspicious patterns. Rachel closed her laptop, her expression thoughtful. You know what's ironic? They chose us because they thought we were vulnerable. Instead, they created their own worst nightmare, a network of women who know all their tricks. A new notification popped up on my screen, another woman reaching out through our secure website. As I read her message, I felt that familiar mix of anger and determination. Her story could have been mine, if not for Rachel's warning. Ladies, I said, turning back to the room, I think it's time for phase 2. Over the next few hours, we outlined our expansion plan. Elena would lead workshops on legal protection strategies. Rachel would coordinate with business schools to educate young entrepreneurs about these schemes. Sandra would manage our growing database of fraud patterns and warning signs. As for me, I had a different mission. Later that evening, I stood in the B&B's newly renovated conference room, facing a group of women who'd flown in from across the country. Some were survivors, others current targets playing along while gathering evidence. All of them were ready to fight back. When I inherited this place, I began, I thought I was just getting a building. But my parents left me something far more valuable. They taught me that true legacy isn't in the property itself, but in what you do with it. I touched my mother's pearls, drawing strength from them as I continued. Each of us here has faced someone who tried to steal not just our businesses, but our heritage. They saw our moments of grief or transition as opportunities to exploit. But they made a crucial mistake. Moving around the room, I met each woman's eyes, seeing in them the same fire that had driven me to fight back. They thought isolating us made us weak. Instead, it showed us exactly what we needed to build, a community that turns their weapons against them. The room hummed with energy as these remarkable women shared ideas, strategies, and support. A real estate agent who'd discovered her broker was part of a similar ring in Miami. A gallery owner who'd narrowly escaped a scheme targeting art dealers. A third-generation bookstore owner currently gathering evidence on a network targeting historic businesses in Boston. As I watched them work, I realized we'd created something unprecedented, a countermeasure to decades of organized fraud. But more than that, we'd built a sisterhood of support and strength. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Whitman gave up 3 more networks, ready to expand interstate? I smiled, thinking of all the women we could help, all the legacies we could protect. Always, I texted back. The sun was setting over the B&B, casting a warm glow through the stained glass windows my parents had lovingly restored. In its light, I saw not just my own triumph over Mark's schemes, but the beginning of a movement that would ensure no other woman had to face these predators alone. We had turned a wedding day betrayal into a fortress of protection, a network of strength, and a legacy of justice. And we were just getting started. 1 year to the day after my almost wedding, I stood in the B&B's grand entrance hall, watching as women from across the country filed in for our first annual Legacy Protection Conference. The old house seemed to glow with purpose, its restored Victorian splendor now a symbol of resilience rather than vulnerability. Final headcount is 312, Sandra reported, tablet in hand. We had to turn people away. Next year, we might need a bigger venue. I smiled, remembering how this all started. From a bride running away to hosting a national conference, Mom would never have believed it. Oh, I think she would, Sarah said, joining us. She was no longer here in an official capacity. She'd taken a special assignment heading a new FBI task force dedicated to investigating marriage fraud schemes. Your mother always said you had her spirit. The morning's keynote session was about to begin. Rachel would be speaking first, sharing her story and introducing our new initiative, a nationwide educational program for women entrepreneurs. Elena had developed the legal curriculum, focusing on protecting family businesses through multiple generations. As I prepared to take the stage, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in one of the antique mirrors. I was wearing my mother's pearls, but everything else about me had changed. The woman who had almost signed away her inheritance was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and more determined. Before I introduce our first speaker, I began, addressing the packed room. I want to share something with you. 1 year ago, I thought I was living a romance story. I was wrong. It was actually a heist story, and I was meant to be the mark. A knowing murmur ran through the crowd. Every woman here had either experienced something similar or knew someone who had. But here's what our would-be thieves didn't understand. When you target women who have built, inherited, or protected family businesses, you're not just going after property or money. You're going after generations of dreams of sacrifice, of love. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the room. In the past year, our network has helped expose 12 fraud operations in 8 states. We've prevented 37 attempted takeovers of family businesses. We've helped recover assets worth over $40 million, but our real achievement isn't in the numbers. Moving away from the podium, I gestured to the women around me. Look around this room. Every woman here has a story. Every one of us has faced someone who thought our moment of vulnerability was their opportunity. They thought they were creating victims. Instead, they created warriors. The energy in the room was palpable as I continued. Today, we're not just sharing stories of survival. We're building a future where these predators can't operate, where every woman knows the warning signs, has the legal tools to protect herself, and most importantly, has a community standing behind her. I touched my mother's pearls, drawing strength from them one last time. My own story began with a wedding day revelation that could have destroyed me. Instead, it revealed something our opponents never expected, that we are strongest when we stand together. As I introduced Rachel, I saw Patricia slip into the back of the room. After turning state's evidence, she had become one of our most valuable advisors, helping us understand and dismantle the very network that had once trapped her. She gave me a small nod. Another operation had been exposed. Another woman saved from the fate I had narrowly escaped. The day unfolded with workshops, strategy sessions, and networking opportunities. But the most powerful moments were the quiet ones. Women exchanging contact information, sharing resources, forming bonds that would protect them far better than any legal document could. As the sun set on our first conference, I found myself back in the library where this journey had begun. Sandra, Rachel, and Elena joined me, each carrying a glass of champagne. "To the worst wedding that never happened," Rachel toasted, making us all laugh. "To the best network that did," Elena added. I raised my glass, thinking of all we had accomplished and all that still lay ahead. To every woman who ever had to start over, I said softly, and to making sure fewer of us have to. Later that night, after the last guest had left, I walked through the quiet halls of my family's B&B. Every room held memories, both of my parents and of the past year's transformation. In the front parlor, where Mark had first charmed his way into my life, we now held weekly support group meetings. The dining room, where he'd thrown our wedding feast to the floor, had hosted strategy sessions that helped take down 3 fraud networks. I opened my laptop one last time to check our secure message board. A new post caught my eye. "I think I'm being targeted. Same pattern you all described. What do I do first?" Without hesitation, I began to type. "First, know that you're not alone. We're here, we believe you, and we know exactly what to do next. Welcome to the sisterhood." The B&B creaked gently, a sound that had comforted me since childhood. But now it seemed to speak not just of history, but of purpose. This place was more than just my inheritance. It had become a beacon of hope, a fortress of strength, and a testament to the power of women protecting women. My almost wedding day had been meant to mark the end of my independence. Instead, it had become the beginning of a movement. And as I looked toward the future, I knew that every woman who found her way to our network would help write the next chapter of this ongoing story of triumph, resilience, and transformation.